I see a red light. Are we recording?
A really. So I guess what we're talking about is all your kind of oddball athletes. So right now, why don't you give a list of some of the more atypical or unusual athletes that you train?
So there'd be 3 at the moment that don't fit into your typical American sports that you would see in a strength and conditioning facility. 2 BMX athletes, one that is racing and one that does freestyle, and then a high school athlete who competes or is about to compete. She's finishing up the coursework that you need to do before it for dog agility racing. So those are not, as far as dog agility racing, not all that dissimilar. From a field sport, you can make some connections there, but BMX is going to be totally different than the type of sports you would typically see in a college or even just private sector strength and conditioning facility. Probably want to direct the conversation towards those.
Yeah, so the BMX. So explain to me the two types of BMX athletes. Obviously, you just briefly mentioned it, but what are some of the differences in the events that they compete in? And then we can maybe go into more specifics about how you train both. The differences between the two in training, also as like the event and then in training. Mm-hmm. And we'll kind of like break that up into questions. But to start, I guess, what are the differences in their sport specifically?
Sure. So racing versus freestyle. In freestyle and racing, you could break them down into some subcategories. But just big picture, freestyle is going to be scored based on judges. So it's going to be a lot more similar to gymnastics in that aspect. So there are going to be subjective ratings for each run there. And depending on the format, whoever has the highest total, basically the best scores, is going to win. On the other end of racing, that's going to be much more similar to track and field. It's going to be whoever crosses the finish line first. Potentially there are going to be some series as opposed to one-off races where you accumulate points throughout the series, but the difference will basically be closer to a track and field style in racing, closer to a gymnastic style when it comes to freestyle.
So you have your athletes come in. Maybe you've never worked with a BMX athlete before. Let's take we could go first with the racing and then with the freestyle, but what is the research you do as a coach, or what do you look for in terms of when you're going to set up your plan? Obviously, you're going to want to formulate some kind of assessment, kind of specific to their needs as an athlete in their sport. So what kind of research do you do beforehand to kind of guide you in how to just get started with them?
In the most broad sense, it's who, what, when, where, why, and then how is the plan at the end. So I start with who am I working with, and that's going to be when they come in for initial assessment or maybe when they first inquire about training with me or anyone at Athletic Lab for that matter, finding out who they are as far as what sport they do, what their injury history is, what their availability for training is. So just getting to know who we're actually working with here, who, what being the second question here. So that's the what you're training for. With these sports, like any other, we'll start with a needs analysis. So actually looking at the sport itself and figuring out what are the demands of the sport. Does it have a premium on fitness? Okay, if it does, what type of energy system work is we're going to need to use here? What are the work-rest ratios if it's a competition they're going to see? If it's a race, what are the durations of the races they're going to typically see? Or how many motos or how many times they're going to race in a given day or a weekend? So getting to know specifically their sport and what are the needs of it. Like I said, those were all examples from a fitness standpoint, but you could then also look at, okay, are they going to need strength? Are there going to be specific strength they're going to need, or is this going to be more in a general standpoint? But once you determine the needs of the sport and who you're training with, you can start going from there. So who, what, when. When is going to be important for either of these athletes in this case there, because whether you're training for a specific competition that you want to be at your best for freestyle, or if you have a race season, there is going to be a competitive series or a single event that you're peaking for. So in the typical way that you would then address a team like basketball, if it's going to be a series of races or a series of competition, you're getting them ready for that in-season time there. If the races or competitions are more spread out, you can maybe potentially treat it more like a sport like track and field, where you're taking peaks or potentially multiple peaks within the year. So who, what, when, where, Where is going to be the other thing too. For us, that means at Athletic Lab, I'm already familiar with the area or the facility. I know what we have access to, so that's not going to really necessarily come into play too much for a new client. Who, what, when, where, why. And why is going to be a big thing too. So why are they coming to me for training in the first place? A good example would be Will Yerkes, BMX racer that I've been working with for a couple months now. He came in already very strong and actually moved really well and easily fit enough for his sport. What he was really looking for was for the first time to be working with a coach and actually have the guidance of someone's programming and someone to push him on those workouts. So for him, there was not a specific injury, let's say, or a weakness in his race, but it was, let's take a look at where I'm at right now. How do I get better? And then for Josh Perry, BMX freestyle athlete, there was the general considerations there, but also he had some more specific ones with a longer injury history. So coming off of ACL surgeries, or in the early part when we were working there, breaking a rib. He's had an arm break at the elbow years ago that didn't quite heal or fuse the way you'd want it to, so it doesn't fully extend. So Josh has more considerations as far as staying healthy in the sport. Not that we would ignore that with Will, but there's some specific reasons for Josh that are different from Will, and vice versa there. So once you go through all of that, you got a pretty good picture of who I'm working with, and then go into the actual assessment. So the assessment, we're going to start off from a performance standpoint, similar to the way I'm going to see any other athlete. For either of those guys, I can skip over sprint tests. They're not as important. But as far as pure power output, still going to look at vertical jump, approach vertical jump, a max power test, usually with the push band, a squat max if appropriate. Upper body strength for both of them is at a premium, controlling the bike. So we're going to look at pressing strength and pulling strength, either with a bench press test or pull-up. For them, we've been using a weighted pull-up max more recently. Potentially looking at eccentric strength with the K-box, and then if need be, fitness. So for Will, fitness was not as much of his goal or what he was looking for training here, but for Josh, especially initially getting ready for competitions, it was. So we would do fitness tests. The two we used were 1 minute assault bike challenge, which you put on the assault bike and do 1 minute all out for calories. So that was very much an anaerobic power test. And the other thing we did with Josh is actually go to the park with him and put a heart rate monitor on to get some information about how he actually responds when he's riding in the park in a competition like scenario. Obviously it wasn't as specific as going to an actual competition, but we could pretty well approximate that and look in that specific case at his heart rate recovery. So the way we did that test was we put him through a 60-second run, competition style with tricks, and then in the time he would have to recover, usually about 3 to 5 minutes before the second comes up, see how far his heart rate would drop. So that was more of a measure of his aerobic fitness and his ability to recover between those two rounds there, which is going to be the specific task that he's going to see on his competition day.
So, looking at the two sports, do you, removing the, let's say, sport implement, right? So there might be, we're talking with different. Maybe like in lacrosse, there's a lacrosse stick, a lacrosse ball. Soccer's got a soccer ball, basketball. Hockey's got a hockey stick and a puck. BMX is a bike, right? When you remove what kind of makes the sports unique or their own thing, what kind of similarities do you start to see just from an energy system standpoint, from a strength standpoint? From a power output standpoint, what kind of similarities do you see, and do you draw upon that to kind of almost simplify what you're doing and not have it be so overwhelmingly like I have to be so specific and this is so different than what I've ever done before?
Yeah, and that kind of comes from the needs analysis. So looking at the sport from a skill standpoint could be extremely overwhelming. And once again, the why, I'm not being brought in to help Josh work on his triple whips. The skill of it, that's something that he's working on either with other pros or with himself on video review. But actually then, if he's going to be doing tricks like that, what kind of strength does he need? So once I realize, okay, upper body strength, specifically like pulling in that scenario there, so strong lats and that core strength there is going to be at a premium, I have experience with other athletes and other scenarios of how to improve that. So you can just draw right from there. The way that will make lower body more powerful for them is going to be the same way you'd make lower body more powerful for another athlete, so another sport. So once you have those needs from a physical standpoint down, the way that you then train those doesn't need to be completely different. We know how to get someone strong as far as lower body or upper body or core strength. So it's then determining, as far as the actual protocols, what's going to be closest. So let's say you mentioned other sports that would be similar. So with track and field, this kind of runs the gamut of energy system needs or types of athletes. So from a fitness standpoint, they're going to be somewhat similar for both of these sports to a long sprinter in track and field. The actual races or the actual competition runs are fairly short, but not so short that it's purely alactic. So you are going to see a certain level of fatigue come in there, but it's very high output the whole time. So a long sprinter, like a 200, 400 runner, is going to be similar there. Another similarity is having rounds. So a 200 or 400 runner might race multiple times in the same day. If you're talking about a college athlete who potentially is running the 200, 400 and a relay and rounds of all of those, maybe racing a whole bunch of times in the same weekend. That'll be similar when it comes to these guys and what they're going to see on their competitions. So you can look close to that as far as energy system development, what you're looking for there. Even for some of the marks like recovery, I mentioned Josh recovering between runs in a competition where he's going to have two 60-second runs and about 3 5 minutes in between. Looked into Joel Jamison's work with MMA athletes because they're going to have actually a little bit shorter recovery window between rounds, but having the heart rate drop between rounds so they're ready to go on the next one is of huge importance. So looking at some of his benchmarks to determine what we should be aiming for is that specific type of aerobic fitness. So once you have the needs analysis from a physical standpoint, not just a skill standpoint or coordination, it shouldn't be that difficult to then look into other areas and determine how you're going to develop those, which is exactly what I did with this.
Cool. So why don't we take each athlete kind of separate right now and just talk about kind of a typical session, maybe one or two if there are sessions that kind of get really different from each other in terms of your target for that session. So you, by all means, give an example of a couple sessions, but basically how are you structuring a session? What are you looking to get out of the session, and how do you then address all this kind of practically or in an applied sense?
So the sessions are going to be typically structured in a way that will align closely with other areas that we do here, or really any best practices strength and conditioning sections. So we're going to go through a general warm-up and then some mobility work or potentially stability work depending on the individual athlete. So I'll kind of section them off for that part of the warm-up based on what they need. And then getting into the performance standpoint, we'll start off with some kind of power work or stuff that's going to be higher coordination. So that could be your Olympic lifts or plyometrics. So recently, Josh can be a good example here. We've been starting off with Olympic lifts. He's moved into, in this new phase here, a complex where he's doing one power, one hang, nothing fancy there. And then going into the middle section for actually both Josh and Will, we're seeing some kind of contrast method. So there's a grouping where we're going to do usually the most efficient way to get this done. It's pretty simple for both of them at the moment from what I'm putting down. It's going to be a lower body strength followed by an upper body strength, lower body power, and upper body power. It's very efficient as far as time. It covers a lot of ground, and it will be also having the benefit of the contrast method there. It's actually having higher outputs on the power work. So for example, at the moment, K-box squats are going to be very present. K-box squats from an eccentric training standpoint, but also you can get the concentric benefit when you put enough wheels on it for pushing up real hard. So I believe it is K-box squat for sets of 5 that Will is doing right now, into a incline bench press, and the 2 lower body exercises are going to be tuck jump, or the lower body exercise is the tuck jump, the upper body is a med ball chest pass. So they're following along with that. The tuck jumps are going to have concentric nature of jumping, but the eccentric nature of landing and turning around quickly on those. So that aligns with the K-box. The incline bench press has that pressing as well as an upward angle. The med ball chest pass, we're doing it bilaterally, is going to be similar there. So they align very well with that. On another day when the strength is going to be potentially more hip dominant, we may change what the lower body is going to be to maybe a med ball between the legs forward. So it's going to fit well with that. So this isn't anything that should be groundbreaking here, but we'll go through that main strength section and then look at accessory work from there. So the accessory work, anyone can arrange this in the way that you see fit for your athletes, but that's going to be generally hitting areas we missed in that first section. So I'd like to keep unilateral exercises in. So for this case, when the lower body bilateral stimulus was in that main complex there, which is K-box squats I mentioned in this example, you're going to see something generally single leg in the secondary or the more accessory area. So that could be single leg deadlifts, that could be single leg squats, there's loads of variations there, but I like having that lower body stability, particularly when the sport is bilateral in nature, you have two pedals, but unilateral in nature that you are an offset at any given time and more pressing on one side. It's going to be more than important to include both types of training there. As well as then potentially core exercises that we wouldn't fit into that first section there. The fitness standpoint for Josh is coming more on his Tuesday and Thursdays as well as at the park. So Josh is moment is training 5 days a week. There's 3 days that are very strength and power based, 2 days that are almost exclusively fitness and general strength based. At the moment, we've kept it very general in that standpoint as far as fitness because the actual next competition is quite distant. As we get closer to that competition, we'll shift the emphasis more towards the fitness side there. So that's getting a little bit on a tangent from your original question of a single session setup, but the way that throughout the week I'm putting those there for Josh because he's training quite frequently is going to be a typical high-low when you're seeing your Monday, Wednesday, Friday being your big hitter strength or power days, and your Tuesday, Thursday being lower intensity days in between those, but are still productive in the full training scheme. Will isn't training as often with me, so his days are relatively similar on each session to what I just explained there. We're pretty much going to check all those boxes there of having lower body power, upper body power, and strength on each one, and we're going to be varying the exercises from day to day to complement one another. So on one day where we're doing a heavier incline bench press, let's say, for an upper body strength, the next day is going to be a pulling one, such as a weighted pull-up. Will's gotten very good at those recently. So you're going to see those days complement each other, but as far as the overall structure, they're fairly similar because that's going to be the most bang for our buck with the amount of time that Will has available to actually come in and train.
Cool. So last thing, we'll just start wrapping up, but let's just talk a little bit about improvements. What kind of feedback have you gotten from your athletes? What kind of, so we can say performance results or in your retest with them, and then also just kind of feedback how they feel when they're actually on the bike. Yeah, go ahead.
So with Will, he's newer client of mine, so haven't gotten as much feedback from him, but from our first to our second retest period, he improved across the board. The area that we're now shifting towards focus is eccentric strength. So when I say across the board, he did improve on all the tests we were doing that I mentioned in the beginning there, and those were all mostly concentric in nature. So as that's improving and as his year and season is progressing, we're going to shift a little bit more towards eccentric. Another reason we're doing that with him now is because he's a bit of a beast. Like, he's a freak. When he first came in, he was already a 500-pound deadlifter and a 400-pound squatter. That's not real common to get athletes who come in already concentrically really, really strong. He was well over a 2 times body weight squat, no question, right as we started. So I knew it wasn't going to take long to get to the point where we could very safely and very confidently move towards more aggressive eccentric work. And now with Josh, I've got a lot more feedback as far as his current improvements, as well as what he said as far as when he's actually doing the sport. So the first time he mentioned noticing improvements there was something called casing. So casing, if you can imagine, kind of take a couple cards here. Somewhat get a ramp here. So if this is the top of the box, and this is actually the ramp here, as he is what's going to be good. I'm going to use your barbell. he's coming into land, if he was to land completely flat here, that's going to be not good. An ideal landing, he's going to go smooth right into the ramp and come down. Casing is when you're going to get one wheel on the ramp or one wheel on the flat. So you're hitting there, and depending on how hard you case, you can fall quite aggressively, or not aggressively, what's the right word I'm looking for here? Dramatically. Or you, at minimum, are going to lose speed, which if you're trying to string together a series of tricks, that's going to be to your disadvantage. You're going to want to maintain as much speed as you can, if not build off of a good landing. So with casing, it's somewhat inevitable. It's going to happen to some degree within your riding. But Josh is noticing when he cases, he's much less likely to fall. It's easier for him to somewhat muscle his way through it because he's strong enough to actually hold himself up, support himself upper body wise without getting crushed onto the handlebars and then potentially over the top onto the ground from there. So that was the first place he saw it. So that was going to be partly a performance standpoint, partly just a margin for error, but then also the ability to do whip tricks faster. That's something that Josh has given me feedback here, that he's wanting to get more upper body strength specifically for whip tricks like that, because he uses a slightly heavier bike than a lot of guys on his level do. That's more his style. He feels better with the stability of that. And so more upper body strength to actually move that quicker is going to be of benefit there. As far as testing parameters as well, when we were getting closer to competitions and doing fitness side, that was the area Josh improved by far the most. His ability to recover between runs. I believe the first time, I'd have to look it up, but the first time we did the heart rate recovery test after the 60-second simulated runs, I believe in the first minute after, he was able to drop about 20 beats per minute, and we got that up to 30 beats per minute within a couple months of training. 40 was the MMA benchmark that Joel Jamieson had put out there for his guys within a minute. Josh has more time and fewer rounds than they do, so there may not be as much of a premium to get that far into it. But I was quite pleased with his improvement there. And as far as racing, it's quite clear where the actual improvements come. You're able to go faster. You're able to handle turns more aggressively, particularly with gates and getting out and getting into the race quickly. And I think partly because of the objectiveness of a sport like that, when there is a clear, you crossed the finish line first, you won, and you didn't, you lost, as well as it being already a bit more of an established Olympic sport, there's more people training in that. It's a little bit more abstract to some when you're looking at freestyle BMX there. So there are styles of riders who are extremely skill-based, and from a physical standpoint, honestly, it's not that demanding. For other styles, like Josh's, where it's very high premium on speed, on height, there's going to be a huge demand on physical ability there. It also, as you progress further, gets to the point when you can do tricks that other guys just can't because they're not as physically capable of you. So as far as pushing the sport forward, Josh is one of the guys who have made that connection. There's others out there who are training as well, but there are fewer guys in that sport training as opposed to BMX racing. I think a big part of that is the subjectiveness of the scoring in the freestyle area and the objectiveness of first place, second place, and so on because of the clock and who crossed the finish line first in racing. But it has been really enjoyable and exciting to work with both sides there and start to get my hands dirty on both of them.
Maybe as a coach, as we go on in the future, we're getting more and more people that realize the benefits of this kind of stuff. So we will, as a coach, be maybe seeing more kind of atypical athletes come to you. So what exactly would you have offer as advice to coaches that might be seeing some unusual clients kind of pop into their facility? You talked about your needs analysis, and obviously that's a good framework. But talk about how you would just kind of, simplify it for them and offer some kind of advice.
I'll steal a quote from Mike, but bite off more than you can chew and then chew it. So don't be intimidated to take on a different sport. You're going to learn from that. So purely from your own development, do it anyway. But also from your ability to help athletes. If you're able to make someone who plays football stronger, faster, more powerful, jump higher, more coordinated, less likely to get injured, you already have the tools to work with pretty much any other sport. You may not know exactly how to apply them yet, and acknowledge that. So that's the needs analysis. Starting off with Josh and another rider, Vince Byron, were the first two BMX athletes I worked with. I would definitely be BSing if I said on day one I knew exactly what to do and exactly what they needed. I had a pretty general idea, but don't fool yourself into thinking you've got it figured out. Check out the sport and see what it needs. From a strength, power, whether it's speed standpoint, for most sports, you're probably going to be pretty comfortable. With a fitness or energy system development standpoint, that's going to be that could be completely unique to its sport. You'll probably find other parallels, but maybe not. Check that out, learn as much as you can. If there's research on it, look into that research. Racing, there was a ton of research on compared to freestyle because I think by the nature of it being a current Olympic sport, although freestyle is moving into the next Olympics, so that may change in the coming years. But for any sport, if there is research done on it, go check that out. There's other people training in that area, go check it out. But at the end of the day, if you have the tools to make another athlete better, you probably already have the tools to help this athlete out. So just learn as much as you can about the sport and then put them to work.